So now our Assassin series is over. I decided to take our next series across the Atlantic Ocean. If you're returning to my channel, you know I am an Irish American, and if there is one period in the history, other than the American Civil War, that I love, it is the Irish War of Independence. Now this will be quite the series, beginning in the early 1900s, and we will be ending with the final ceasefire between the British government and Provisional Irish Republican Army in July of 2005, which I actually remember in great detail, as I actually worked for one of the U.S. congressmen who helped broker the peace in his later tenure in the United States House of Representatives. But this period could debatably begin several hundred years before the 1798 Rising, for example, of the United Irishmen. But debatably, I instead begin it in 1848 with the Young Irelanders Rising, which resulted in the creation of the Irish tricolour from Thomas Francis Meagher in 1848. Right before he was sent into exile, he gifted the flag to his homeland. He would then go on to serve as a general in the American Civil War and die while serving the U.S. Army in the Montana Territory. But the most important thing to come out of this conflict was the idea of the Fenian Brotherhood. Now, Fenian is a term that is connected to men and women who believe in Irish independence, nationalism, and self-destination. The idea that Ireland no longer belonged to England, but deserved to be its own autonomous and free nation. So, a supporter of the Young Irelanders Rising, on St. Patrick's Day, James Stephens, in 1858, declared the Irish Republican Brotherhood, a sister organization to his colleague John O'Mahony's Fenian Brotherhood in the United States. Now, unlike the Fenian Brotherhood, the Irish Republican Brotherhood would survive the 19th century. Not only that, but they would become such a larger organization that they would lead to Ireland getting many pro-Irish representatives in the British Parliament. Now, in the early 20th century, a great push was coming now. Though an organization like the Irish Republican Brotherhood wanted Irish independence, the general public wasn't in full support of this. But they were in support of the idea of Irish Home Rule. Now, this is very similar to the Canadian Parliament. They would still be subjects of the Crown, but they would have an Irish Parliament with the King as the head of state. Being led by Charles Stewart Parnell and the Irish Parliamentarian Party has continued to become a coveted supporter needed for the Conservatives and Liberal parties in the British Parliament. But the issue was in Ireland, especially the North, the Irish Protestants were very opposed to the idea of home rule. This was mainly because they identified themselves more as English citizens than how people in the southern counties viewed themselves as Irish citizens. So in response to home rule in the north, the Irish Unionists created the Ulster Volunteer Force. Being pro-England, this gave a little bit of an institutional support to the organization, and they became a large Unionist militia in the north, numbering 100,000 in 1914. The Irish Republican Brotherhood, however, became very threatened by the Ulster Force. First, National Volunteers, but then they founded the Irish Volunteers in 1914. But that same year, something broke out in the world. Not only would tear apart the volunteer organizations, but it would also put the notion of home rule off the docket of Parliament. The Archduke of Austria, Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was assassinated in Sarajevo with his wife Sophie on June 28, 1914. Originally, the English were neutral in the conflict, with Austria and Germany fighting against France and Russia. But things changed in August of 1914 when the German army, in an attempt to invade France from the northeast, invaded the Kingdom of Belgium. The British Empire, guaranteeing the protection of the Belgians, then declared war. In Ireland, nationalism for the Empire grew. Men of the Ulster Volunteers and Irish Volunteers were then sent to go fight on the western fronts of Europe. For 2 years, Irish nationalists would sit awaiting what to do next. more extremist group of the IRB, Irish Republican Brotherhood, formed what became known as the Military Council. It was a group of individuals who had now decided home rule was done. It was only total liberation from the British Empire. The council was originally formed was Padraig Pearse, the headmaster of an Irish language preparatory school in Dublin; Thomas Clarke, an very old and seasoned Irish Republican activist; Joseph Plunkett, another Irish Republican activist and close friend of Pearse, and also the heir to one of the most wealthy families in Ireland; Sean McDermott, Clarke's protege, and also another activist who was a leading member in the Irish Volunteers; Eamon Kant, who had an extremely lucrative career in finance and had risen to become an officer in the Irish Volunteers; and finally, Thomas MacDonagh, another teacher who taught at Plunkett's school. But there was another person who was left out of this council. In the early 1900s in Ireland, socialists began to rise up. A man named Joseph Larkin, a socialist, led a giant protest in Dublin. His protege's name was James Connolly, who helped the creation of something known as the Irish Citizen Army, a socialist organization whose duty it was to protect the working class people. Now, Connolly was well respected by all volunteer leaders and volunteers themselves, but Connolly was originally not the greatest fan of the volunteers. He actually did not like their vision of a republic, one led by philosophers and activists. He wanted it to be led by the people and workers. But after talking to the president of the council, Thomas Clarke, began to talk to Connolly more and more. After multiple parleys between the two leaders, Connolly officially agreed to join the coalition of the IRB, adding Connolly as a new member of the IRB Military Council. They also gained the assistance of a British diplomat named Sir Roger Casement. Casement was actually the man who had reported the atrocities being committed in the Belgian Congo, in the famous Casement Report. He would be actually knighted by the British Crown for this service. But Casement was an Irishman from birth, and a very proud Irish nationalist at that. So with the support of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, he began to talk of all people, representatives of the German imperial government in New York. With these meetings, the German government agreed to deliver an order of rifles to Ireland and even possible German military support. The plan was for the German Imperial Army to land on the west coast of Ireland, then be joined by pockets of Irish volunteers to march and seize Dublin. In major cities like Cork, Belfast, Castlebar, Limerick, Galway, and Waterford, individual commands of Irish volunteers would seize the cities. Now, in 1916, the leaders truly believed it was the time to strike, because the British were at war. But this was somewhat the opposite of reality. The British Empire was actually at the peak of its military strength, 763,000 men strong. So the reality was the British were not as weak as they could have been. But the Military Council decided to strike on April 21st of 1916, which was Easter week, which would be a very quiet period in Ireland, a Catholic nation. Now the Germans were returning Casement back to Ireland, right off the coast of County Kerry. Casement was ill and struggled, but he returned to Ireland on a German U-boat with supplies, only to be captured when people looking to him saw him exiting this German submarine and rowing to shore. They placed him under arrest. On his person were many incriminating files of the purchase of weapons and other such things, not just specifically what organization or people were involved. Everything was done in pseudonyms, so they didn't immediately know who was involved in this clear treason. Also found in Casement was his diary. This became famous in history as the Black Diaries, that confirmed that Roger Casement was a homosexual. Treason, and what at the time was considered illegal sodomy, did not make things very bright for Casement, because, again, back then they weren't as welcoming to the LGBT community as they are today. So he was sent off back to England, where he would stand trial. Owen MacNeill, who was the council's chosen supreme commander of the Irish Volunteers, upon news of Casement's arrest, called for a general stand-down of all Irish volunteers. 175,000 men and women across Ireland were given the command to stand down. But in Dublin, the military council refused to stand down. They still planned to make the attack with 2,500 men. But mass confusion still will hit when MacNeill submitted an article ordering a general stand down. Tomorrow we will begin the Easter Rising, the week Ireland began to push for independence. Thanks for watching, again. Hope you enjoyed. Please like, share, and comment if you are new to the channel, and please subscribe. I have new content up daily. Again, I took the past week off just for a little mental health. Not really mental health, I just wanted to take a break from everything. I did take a short hiatus for some personal time between work and this channel. Just needed the break. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one.